about the immigration status. There was different provisions, different sections in the law, but only in the bill that was introduced in 2010, but only one of the sections was able to stand in the court. So the only part of the bill of SB 1070 that actually went into implementation is section 2B. And I'm going to give you all paperwork and handouts and all kinds of cool stuff so you can look at. But basically, what this law does, it makes it so that any cop, any law enforcement agent that thinks that if someone looks suspicious of being undocumented, or like people say illegal, like if they look or they reached reasonable suspicion that that person's illegally in the country, and I don't use that word, but I'm just saying it the way people understand it, but what we like to use is the term undocumented. And even that is not, it doesn't encompass the whole issue of like these people, right? Because undocumented people do have documents. Anyways, the point is that if officers stop someone during their regular duty, a traffic stop, are doing whatever their regular job encompasses, in that process, if they reach reasonable suspicion, they will question the person about the immigration status. After that, the officer can call ICE, call immigration, call Border Patrol, whoever else handles immigration issues, and they will take people, they will deport them, or they will put them in proceedings to, they arrest them, and then they put them into a database, they check their fingerprints, they take them to jail, and in some situations they're deported immediately. In other cases, they go through having to be at the county jail, which is Arpaio's jail, MCSO, Maricopa County Jail. And then from that jail, they'll be transferred over to a detention center, an immigration detention center, which usually are privately owned jails. So they make profit off people being there. There's a whole sort of like full circle conversation around why this bill passed, why this law is in place, and how it connects back to the incarceration. Like, it's basically making money off immigrants being incarcerated, because these private companies that are holding these immigrant families or immigrant people who probably were stopped for a traffic violation, like your tail light was broken and was out, and they end up in detention center for months, sometimes without representation. So there's a lot of issues there. We could talk about those later, but pretty much that's the impact that this law has. So one of the problems here, as I'm sure you might be like, well, how do you reach reasonable suspicion? How do you differentiate of who you're going to ask if they're undocumented, and who will you and who will not be asked, right? So I think we all know that answer, right? It's racial profiling. So you can only, basically in their training, the police departments have been trained to question for certain things, right? If a person has an ID that's from a foreign country, that's from another place, if the person has difficulty speaking English, if the person's dress code is off, if they say that if the person looks like they just crossed the desert and are all dusty and full of dirt and have a sweater and like gallons and a jacket in like summer, then that would be reasonable suspicion, right? But we all know that dress code is kind of racially profiling. If you're profiling a person by the way they're dressed, and that's a part of their description, that's kind of racial profiling in my opinion. So a part of their training in the police department's PowerPoint trainings, we were able to get copies of that and by public records request. And so we were able to see how these officers are being trained. So in the courts, we're still fighting SB 1070, but we need to, and that specific section of the law, as well as section 2B, so that, you know, we can get rid of it. But we haven't won the lawsuit, so I'm collecting stories of people that have been impacted by this law. We're collecting stories of people that have been wrongfully accused of being undocumented, being detained, residents, citizens, people in pending statuses, because we don't know, right? How is an officer to know who is undocumented and who's not? So we've had several cases that have come through. We had a hotline. I used to run the hotline back in 2012. So the law was stuck from 2010 to 2012. It was stuck in the courts. They were fighting it, going back and forth, till September of 2012. When it actually went into implementation, And then law enforcement officials across the state were able to actually enforce it and question people about their immigration status. After this, we started seeing like all the different problems. We started seeing parents. Our number one caller were moms. Moms were worried about their kids and what was going to happen to their kids if they got pulled over and their kids were with them in the car. So yeah, it was really sad. I mean, people were, super afraid of what was going to happen, especially people with mixed status families, because some of you might know someone, or some of your students might have, the student might be a U.S. citizen, but the mom might be undocumented, or the mom or the aunt or the abuelita or the someone cousin is a resident, someone else is a U.S. citizen, someone else has a tourist visa. So that's what we call the mixed status family. But someone in the family, if you have an undocumented person in that kid's family, that child might have faced or has encountered issues with deportations. Sometimes when a family member doesn't have any sort of form of legal status, that family might have gone through a deportation, which means that like that person was removed from the country, was just thrown out of the country without any legal process, sometimes without even any legal representation. So the point of all of this is that it impacts your students. It impacts children as well. Especially if you're working in Latino communities and immigrant-based communities, it does impact. So we also heard, and the reason why I'm here and talking about this issue and how it relates back to students is because we've heard of cases where students were questioned about the immigration status at schools by SROs. So we had one of our first callers, one mom called us, she's a US citizen. So I want to talk about case studies, so I'll give you 3 examples and then we can talk about them and how it relates back to what you do. But we had three examples. So one of them was from a US citizen mom, Evelyn, in West Phoenix. And her son, 13-year-old, her 13-year-old son got into a fight at a bus stop after school and outside of school. The next day, I guess they got into a pretty big fight, the other kid was injured. He comes back to school the next day and the SRO says, you need to call your mom, she needs to come into the office. We heard about what happened, right, after school. So the kid calls the mom comes over, the mom's asked for an ID, which right away is like, the mom's kind of like, why are you asking me for an ID? I've been a parent here and an active parent at this school. Why are you asking me for this, right? And the officer said, well, we can't give you your kid over unless we know who you are. And the principal was there and she's like, well, you know me. I don't even know why this is a question. So immediately the mom was like, this is really weird. What is happening? The officer calls immigration, ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement on the kid. Tells the mom, I have to call ICE on your kid because he got into this fight and I have to report him under SB 1070. I have to report him to ICE. And the mom's like, why are you going to do that? Like, what is going on? He's a U.S. citizen. The officer calls SRO on campus, calls ICE, and says, I have this kid, he got in a fight, he's blah, 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 whatever. And ICE says, why are you calling us? Like, he's a U.S. citizen. So there's this tons of confusion of like, why is this SRO calling and he thinks he has to enforce the law, right? So there's this whole issue about training and how are officers being trained, and why does this officer not know that he's not supposed to call immigration on a school campus on a minor? Of course his mom was there, but still, this should not be happening. This is a problem. Because that kid could have been taken, right? What if the mom wasn't there? What if the mom showed up and didn't have an ID? And that's her question. That's why she called our hotline, because she was like, what if I was undocumented? What if I wouldn't have been a U.S. citizen mom? So that's why I'm calling, because I think this is an injustice. I should not be questioned at my kid's school where I'm an active parent about who I am, my identity, and why are they calling ICE on my child? And if this is happening to me, that I'm a U.S. citizen, what could happen to parents who don't have anything? So immediately she became one of our advocates, has been, super willing to share the story, super willing to talk to us, to be a part of meetings and all, engage in the conversation about this. The second story is from a student in a high school in Tucson. This student is a brilliant student, has some learning disabilities, but has this brilliant capacity of fixing computers. So he is known in the community to fix computers. So this kid goes, takes him a few computers and says, can you open these computers? They don't work. So this kid, the genius kid, in some capacity, takes the computers, fixes them, and opens them. The next day, this kid who took him the computers asks for them and says, well, I can't pay you. Can you give me the computers and I'll give you one. Thanks for fixing them. I'll give you a computer as a payment. So this kid says, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Why not? The next day, the school calls them in. The SRO calls them in. The principal calls this kid in and says, you stole computers from our school. And he says, no, I didn't. I don't. And he says, you have this computer. We traced the computers. We know that you have one of them. And the kid says, well, I have one of them, but I didn't steal it. Someone gave it to me. I fixed it, and somebody gave it to me. The mom, so they call the mom. The mom comes over and brings the computer. And the principal has issues with the student. The student has discipline issues, obviously, and has learning disabilities. They don't want to deal with this kid. They want him off the campus. They want him out of the school. So immediately, I think that some of the administrators saw this as a way of like, let's get him out. We don't want him here anymore, right? Because that happens. You all know that there's some kids that just staff don't like, right? And so this is sad. It's sad, but it's true. It happens. So this was a way of like a moment of opportunity for this principal who did not like the student to get him out. So he told the SRO, take him. I don't want him here. The SRO called Border Patrol. Border Patrol shows up and says, well, we can't pick him up at the school. Meet us at the Circle K. They leave the campus. The principal knowingly knows this and says, fine, take him. I don't want him in my campus. And they take him, they call the mom. The mom's undocumented. And she's freaking out. And she's like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen to my son? She has to call her brother, who's a resident, I believe, to accompany her son to see where they're going to take him, what's happening in this process. The uncle shows up, and the kid is being handed over at a Circle K to Border Patrol agent. And they arrest him and they take him. Border Patrol comes to the Circle K. So it goes from discipline issues, dealing with this, right? The SRO gets involved. The SRO calls Border Patrol. Border Patrol takes them, arrests them, and takes them to their Border Patrol office, which is a federal agency. This is a kid, like a 15-year-old kid. And unfortunately, he does not have documents. And his uncle was there in the process, following them, trying to keep track of what they were doing with him. Finally, they have to do all kinds of paperwork, get administrative information from the school saying that he has been a student there for however long, and proof that he's been a student, all kinds of stuff. The point is that he qualified for this other program called DACA, which I'll talk to you all about a little bit more, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which President Obama basically gave relief to students who fit the requirements to get a worker's permit and a 2-year worker's permit and a Social Security to work. And I'll talk to you all about a little bit more about that. But the point is that this kid qualified for this program. The mom was able to get him an attorney, get the paperwork done. But in the meantime, this kid was under arrest by federal agents, Border Patrol. And this, again, should not be happening. This should not be happening in our schools. And finally, the third case, and so he was able to get, just to finish up, he was able to get his DACA permit. He's already suffering and already going through so many self-esteem issues, so many like, I have so many barriers, I'm not going to make it, so why should I even finish school type of mentality, which is like, a big no-no, right? Like, we as educators and people who care about students, we're like, no, don't give up, you can do it. So we went to his house, we interviewed him, gave him a pep talk, and so he's still in school. And we wrote a letter to both of the districts, got a letter from the ACLU saying, like, we're aware of what happened. The district and the police departments are now blaming each other because, again, there's no resolutions or strict guidelines or policy that focuses around this issue. And we'll talk a little bit more about solutions for that. Yeah.
I was just wondering, who was the person who had him fixing the computers, and why did they bring that individual in at all in this?
You know, that's a very interesting question. I don't know what happened to the other kid.
Oh, so it was another kid who had him fixing the computers? Oh.
Somebody went to him. He like fixes, everybody knows that he fixes computers, so everybody goes to him. And
so was the computer even school property?
Yeah, it was. That's how the school got involved. That's why the SRO got involved, because it was computers that were taken from the school. I don't know if they were like the little pads or whatever. I don't know. I don't think they were laptops. I can't remember. The point is that it was like 3 of them, and he like helped to unlock them and helped to fix them, something like that.
Okay.
So, but I don't know what happened to the other kid. The point is that we were in this because of the immigration issue, and like we don't want kids being questioned about their immigration status at schools. So we wrote to the districts. One of the districts were like, oh, so outraged. And the other district was like, oh, it's the police department's fault. They're not trained. So what we're saying now, what we're having to do is we're starting a working group. I don't know if anyone wants to be involved in it. We could talk some more about it towards the end of this conversation. But pretty much there's no one doing work around school to prison pipeline issues. And in this area of immigration enforcement in schools, not a lot of people know that this is an issue that has happened. So we're looking for more stories. We're looking to get cases. We want to see if this is truly a pattern. I mean, this should not be even happening in the first place. So some of the steps that we're taking and that we're starting to work on is creating a working group of teachers, advocates, educators, school board members, to help us advocate for a resolution in a few districts in the area, maybe perhaps 3 of the main school districts in Phoenix and in Tucson, and then pressure and talk to some people at the Arizona School Board Association, and also talk to the Arizona Board of Education about this, because it's that department that has the program that works with SROs. And so SROs get funding differently. Some get private grants. Other SROs get grants from the Department of Education. Others get grants or money from their individual agency. So it's very different what their curriculum looks like, what their duties are on campus are, what the policies and regulations of discipline are. So it's very much in the works. We're learning a lot about this because there's really not an organization that's focused on this issue, and that's why we're here to ask questions, to learn, to figure out why is my SRO here? Why do they have this incredible amount of power over discipline when it should be administrators? And I think that's what needs to be settled, is like, what are the guidelines around, statewide, what are the guidelines around discipline? Who has, say, and sort of like very strict rules or regulations at schools that like administrators shouldn't be handing kids over to SROs just because this kid's acting out, oh, we're gonna send them to the SRO, take care of it. Right? Because the teacher, I know teachers are facing so much already in the classrooms, and so teachers get super annoyed and are trying to focus, trying to teach their lesson plans, have so much on their plate, but yet, you have this kid acting up, and so sometimes it's just the easiest way out is just to hand the kid over to the police officer on campus, thinking and with hopes that that kid will probably be better behaved if the SRO talks to him, right? So the third case I'll talk about, and then you all can ask me questions and we can talk, and I'll tell you more about this 1070, all kinds of stuff. So the third case I just got recently, it was of a student in Central Phoenix, has a learning disability. He's a bigger kid, so he is treated like a bigger kid, but really he's younger, right? So he's a big kid that everybody treats like he's older than his age really is. So he's a softie in the inside. His psychological level is way different than people deal with him based on appearance. So the point is that this kid was acting out in school, probably is bored in class, probably doesn't get the projects or the class assignments because he has a learning disability that he hadn't been evaluated on, and wasn't getting the proper classroom assignments or wasn't getting the proper education that he needed for his, for his learning disability. And so he was acting out, starts getting picked on by the teacher, the students. He starts, acting up, starts chewing gum on a regular basis in class. Teacher says, stop chewing gum, stop chewing gum. It's a daily hassle with this kid. The teacher has to call in the mom and has the mom sit in classroom for the whole entire day with him, so that she can see how he acts up, right? Days after, the kid goes and puts packets of gum on the teacher's desk, and they think, all right, finally he gave in. He's putting his packets away, whatever. He's giving us the chewing gum, the gum, and he's gonna stop chewing gum. So the principal gets involved. The point is that the week after something happens, he starts chewing gum again. So they decide to move him across the street to the elementary school or to the primary school, where he's there with a substitute teacher and another kid who's younger than him, and all they do is they're handed over worksheets the whole entire day from like 8 p.m. to like 4 p.m. They only have two bathroom breaks, and a lunch break of like 30 minutes. He's not allowed to be with his peers. He's not allowed to talk throughout this whole day. He's sitting there by himself. And he's also denied, so this is called the alternative program within the school, right? And he doesn't have curriculum. He doesn't have a lesson. He just has worksheets that the teachers pass on to the substitute for him to complete throughout the day. In this program, he's not allowed to, because he's in this program, he's denied transportation services. So the school won't allow him to take the school bus to get to the class. So the mom is undocumented, and she's really upset. The kid lives far from the school, lives a few miles away from the school. And the mom arranges for a friend to take her son to school, but the friend can only drop him off an hour earlier. So this kid has to stay outside of the classroom an hour before class starts. And the administration sees that he's outside the class and calls the dad of this child and says, we don't want your kid standing outside of the class. If we see him standing outside of the classroom off school hours, we're going to call the cops. So these are undocumented parents. How do you think they felt when they heard, we're going to call the cops, knowing that SB 1070 is in effect?
Terrifying.
Exactly. And so then the mom's like, well, I have no other choice but to send my kid to school an hour earlier because you all won't give him transportation. And the end of the story is he pretty much does have discipline issues. The mom tried to have a meeting with the learning disability that he hasn't been evaluated on. The mom basically has gotten a counselor involved, like a social worker from the community that interviewed him, and that was kind of the issue, right? He was feeling bullied, he was feeling like out of place, he was feeling bored in class, he was feeling like he was being mistreated, or like he wasn't being treated fairly in the classroom. So he was feeling also targeted by the teacher, and just feeling like he was just out of place, right? And so he's being picked on constantly. And so it was a social worker who determined that he was starting to feel targeted because he looks bigger than he actually is, and so that started impacting him a lot emotionally, and which is the whole thing with like acting out and being a class clown and just being bored in class and distracting all the kids. He's suspended for doing something else, for like chasing some other kid around, and the point is that he is now finishing up. I think he's in 8th grade. Yeah, he's in 8th grade, and this is a really good example. That could have gone so bad, right? If they could have called the SRO, and they also have an SRO on their campus, and they're constantly being threatened. Kids are being constantly like, oh, if you're not behaving, we're gonna call SRO in, or we're gonna call so-and-so SRO to come over. And so that's not a way to deal with these issues, right? This kid obviously has a learning disability, and that's why he's bored in class and doing all this stuff. But I met with his mom, and she's willing to be an advocate as well and be one of the parents to advocate for a change in resolution so that schools, think more clearly about asking about documents. or even threatening to call the cops, right? Because kids won't feel safe, and if they won't feel safe and their parents don't feel safe sending their kids to school, they're not going to send their kids to school anymore. Right? And so then we're going to have all these kids not going to school. And we had it. We had, when SB 1070 was being implemented, we had a huge amount of kids leaving the school districts. I don't know, you can talk to people, probably schools in your areas. I mean, teachers who have been at your school for a longer time. You can ask them, what happened in 2010, like with this anti-immigrant law, did kids leave? Were families leaving? They'll tell you, yes, we saw a big amount of kids being taken out of school because people were moving from the state. And that's, they were either leaving back to their countries or they were moving out from Arizona to other states around. And that's exactly what the law is meant to do. It's meant to make it so bad. It's called attrition through enforcement. It makes it so bad for immigrant families and for immigrant communities and people of color so that they don't want to live here. That's what the law essentially does. So yeah, these are three examples of why I'm doing this immigration enforcement in schools and trying to pass policy and resolutions so that we have a strict guideline that no child, my goal and our goal is that no child is ever questioned about their immigration status at school. I would love that no child is ever questioned anywhere about their status, but in this case, it should definitely not happen in schools. So what are your thoughts? I don't know, what are you thinking? Any questions? We can talk about it. I know it's a hard issue.
I don't know if this is related or not, but I heard on the radio this morning that Arpaio's office had a lawsuit against them for discrimination, and there's like a consultant involved to like enforce that. Has that changed the policies at all?
Yeah, so MCSO, so Arpaio, there was a lawsuit that the ACLU sued MCSO for racially profiling Latinos. So we won that lawsuit because Arpaio is really out there with saying, I go get Mexicans and I go get Latinos and this is what we do. And so it's been a really long battle against MCSO for like over 5 years. I believe that we've been in this lawsuit. And finally, now that we've won, a part of the lawsuit negotiations were basically that we got a monitor to monitor him and his organization, the MCSO, like all the sheriffs, all the people that work under him are basically under this man, Bob Warshaw, who is seeing all of the training and seeing what they're doing in their patrol stops. And he has like a team of 11 people that are going to be looking at data collection and all sorts of stuff. But that's just for that one department, just Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. So that doesn't apply to all the other police agencies. But we're looking to see how this model could also be used for other police departments and other police agencies. Yeah, but I mean, it was kind of a big deal, right? Like Arpaio was really out there with his comments, and we were able to prove that he was racially discriminated. He was basically really targeting a specific race of people, and he even wrote a book, and like he had statements in his books, and I mean, every single interview that he would do, like on the Bill O'Reilly show or like on super extremist groups meetings and all kinds of stuff, there was evidence that showed the courts that he was a racist, bigot towards the migrant or any Mexican lookalike or anyone who's from an immigrant community, and specifically Latinos. And so there was emails that we were able to get, and in those emails there was like people, saying like, there's 3 Mexicans, they look like they're illegals standing outside McDonald's every day. I want you to come see. And they'd be like, thank you for caring so much about your neighborhood. We'll be there tomorrow. And they just go and get them. And so there was, things like that were super evident that he was racially profiling. And that he was training, that the training was discriminatory. And that they were going out of their way. So now to get Latinos. With other agencies, it's not as easy, right? We don't have someone who's out there, as much as he is, and if they do it, it might not be as, showy like Arpaio. So we'd have to